Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we'll be reviewing Zack Snyder's Justice League. Zack Snyder's Justice League is a recut version of the 2017 film Justice League. Zack Snyder had to step away from that film for a personal tragedy, and the film was cut and partially reshot by Joss Whedon. Since then, the online fan community has lobbied for the Snyder Cut, and here we have it. Zack Snyder's fabled recut version of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Cyborg, and The Flash banding together to save the world. So Matt, what did you think of Zack Snyder's Justice League?
All right, so I was really looking forward to this movie. I know a lot of people were. Maybe not for the reasons that a lot of people were looking forward to it. I was looking forward to it because I think it's so interesting to see a movie being recut, like a big blockbuster action film.
Yeah.
And here we are, I feel like the first time in history this has happened, where you have this big movie that was supposed to be completed, cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and we got what we got in 2017 with Justice League, which was a tragedy. And, you know, there are parts of this movie that still, like there were flaws in the first movie, and those flaws are still there in the second movie, but this movie is like 1,000 times better than the first one was. And, you know, they freaking did Ray Fisher a disservice in the first movie. Like, they literally took away his entire role in the first movie because this movie has everything with him.
There's this famous story about Terrence Malick that he recut The Thin Red Line, and Adrian Brody thought that he was the lead, and he completely recut the movie, and Adrian Brody's barely in it, and he didn't know until he saw the film at the premiere. It's kind of a famous story anyway. It's
interesting that there was all these great things that were kind of there that they just cut out of the first one. It makes no sense to me. And kind of on top of that, there was so much that they cut from the first movie, so much exposition, that really made this film so much better. We learned so much more about these boxes, where they came from, their, you know, what their importance is and what damage they can cause. And I feel like all that was just missing for the first one. We were just kind of like thrown into this world. Oh, there's these boxes and we gotta stop them from coming together and creating this convergence. And this movie, they at least did the diligence of like building where they came from and why they exist.
Okay, so I'm gonna back up like a lot. So this movie, I think, really, it kind of forces me to think about my own film criticism. Because I think a lot of the criticism I'm hearing, or the film criticism I'm hearing in terms of good and bad, is solely comparing this to the first Justice League, which is a disaster. And yes, this movie is better. This movie is definitely better than that disaster. So I think it's kind of unfair criticism to just compare it to that movie and say because we got a backstory for, say, Steppenwolf. Getting a backstory at all is better than getting no backstory, right? So let's start there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that his backstory in this film is worthwhile. And I think that that is a good example for a lot of issues I have with this film as a whole. Like I said, if you put the two together, and you ask me which one do I want to watch again, even though this one's 4 hours, I'm going to pick this one every time. But I think that there's some crucial information here that's really great and definitely makes the whole experience much better. I think there's a lot of deleted scenes in here that this starts feeling like Lord of the Rings, the expanded edition.
Yeah, I think in terms of that, this movie is way too long. There are things in here that they just don't need to have. But there is a level of things that need to be included for a movie to work.
Oh, yeah.
And the previous movie was basically incoherent. And this movie, there's some semblance of what a movie is supposed to be.
This movie is complete and consistent, for better or worse. If you take this film out of the context, say 2017 Justice League never happened, and this movie just came out, would we think this was a good movie? I'm going to say no.
I would say, you know what's interesting is that as this movie progressed, I found myself enjoying myself more and more. I think the climax of the movie with the big battle,
it's good.
It's completely redone. And it's not the same as it was the first time. The way things happen and the way it ends, that kind of battle sequence ends, is completely different. And I was kind of blown away by that. And then it just fell off a cliff right after there. I think the epilogue...
I think we have to do the epilogue probably in a spoiler section or something, because I got to talk about that.
Okay.
We can't talk about it too much, I guess.
Okay, we will leave the epilogue spoiler talk till the end of the video. We'll give you a warning.
Okay.
So I know we were talking about kind of separating this from the first movie, but I think just because that's what I found so interesting about reviewing this is that taking a movie that was pretty much shot mostly by Zack Snyder and having it edited by one person and then edited by another separately, I think is a really interesting conversation to be had.
Yeah,
there were certain things about this movie that were completely different. The aspect ratio that Zack Snyder put it in, the score. The score is so different than the original movie.
Yeah.
And it's much better, I think.
And just the general tone and editing style. Like, I would notice it first with the Aquaman scene, which I think is the first scene in this movie. I can't remember if it's the first scene in the 2017 movie. But the Aquaman scene is literally like 30 seconds in Whedon's version. And it's quick and it's quippy, and there's just all these jump cuts, and then, all right, see you later. In Zack Snyder's, it probably goes on for 5 minutes, I would say. So it's almost like the flaws of both of these men are on display. I prefer Snyder's version. I think it's a much more fluid scene, but it's still a little too long. And it ends with this really weird, portentous women singing because they love Aquaman.
Oh, that was so weird.
That was really strange.
I would have totally cut that.
That was just confounding.
You know what? And I think that leads me to one of the biggest flaws of this movie. And that is that there is nothing building up to this. And that's where DC, I think, kind of fails, is that they don't plan these things out well enough. And so this movie has, to me, personally, it just had no weight to it. It's like this big thing is happening, they gotta save the world, but I don't feel it. I know it's like a superhero movie, so none of it is based in reality, but I think to make it believable, you have to get as close to reality as you can, that these characters could possibly exist in this world.
This film had so much weight on it because before this film, there wasn't an Aquaman film, there hadn't been a Flash film, there hadn't been a Cyborg film, so they had to introduce all of these people and then get them together and have us all feel it, which is a tremendous weight for a movie. If you think of the way you felt during Avengers Endgame when they say Avengers Assemble, before that final battle, it was 10 years leading to that moment. Like, Marvel was patient and they developed each character so that when they were all together for this huge thing, you really felt something. And I think DC, I think they did it like it is lazy, but at the same time, I think they said, Marvel's moving really fast and we gotta move really fast, so let's just do this thing. We've talked a lot about the negative, and I don't want to get into the role of like, I hate it and you love it. So I want to talk about a couple things that I liked about it. I think that Superman returning was better this time. It felt more epic. It does feel much more momentous when he is actually risen. Flash's introduction is way better. That scene, that's probably my favorite scene in the movie, actually, and I can't believe it was cut. I think Cyborg's backstory is, again, a backstory, and it's decent. It's decent, but it just doesn't quite land the emotional beats for me. Maybe it gets back to the thing that you were talking about, where this film just is not developed with prior films, so it's hard for us to feel attached to those characters.
Yeah, I feel like they have to do way too much with Cyborg's character, and Flash's in particular, to give you a sense of their backstory within a movie that's supposed to be a climactic movie. I mean, this is like supposed to be this big battle to save the world. Like, I feel like we should have been introduced to these characters beforehand. I know they've been introduced in countless television shows and the comics, of course, if people are familiar with them. But at the same time, I feel like for building a movie franchise based off these characters, I feel like you really have to introduce them early enough, because they're individual people. They're played by a specific set of actors, and I think that continuity needs to be had to create that emotion. In particular with Cyborg, it's just, I think one of the failures of this movie in terms of his characters, I did not feel the relationship between him and his father.
Yeah, I agree, and I wanted to feel it because it's kind of a good storyline.
Same with Flash's character and his dad in jail. Like, I didn't really feel that relationship. I feel like it was just, both of these relationships were just put on us, and I feel like if we had experienced them earlier on in different movies, we would have been introduced to them, we would have known how the aspects of their relationships work, and we would have cared for them more when we saw this movie.
Yeah, and frankly, that's a Zack Snyder problem. His films kind of always have that problem. Like, he adapted Watchmen, which is my favorite graphic novel ever, and it's a literal adaptation of Watchmen. Like, everything that happens in the Watchmen comic happens in the film. The great kind of engagement with ideas and the great character depth, that's all lost in his version for this kind of literal interpretation of events. And I think he has a similar problem here. He almost knows that he needs to do it from a story perspective, so he gives them kind of like this little tortured backstory, but you never really feel any of it. Like, I don't really think he cares about the right things, or he doesn't care about the things that I care about in filmmaking.
He is definitely more concerned with style in his movies. I think 300 also is a great example.
Which, by the way, all the things we're talking about, you can have all those things at once. Like, people have done it.
No, you can.
Nolan's done it. Marvel's done it. So it's not as if he needs to dial down his style. He can still be Zack Snyder and still do these other things well.
Yeah, and I mean I think that's just personal preference to him, what he wants to do as a director. You know, how that turns out is how we perceive it, but I think there's definitely going to be a group of people who really, really enjoy this movie, and I respect that. I think, but you know, there's some things about this movie that I'm just looking for more of, and they're not here.
Yeah, I'll just go and say that he heightens all of the things that I don't like about movies, and he neglects all of the things that I really care about in movies, and he does it consistently.
Yeah, and on top of that, kind of, we haven't really gotten to Ben Affleck as Batman yet, and I think that's one of the errors here in terms of writing. I feel like there was really no arc to his character. I mean, same in the first movie and this movie. I mean, it's like all of a sudden he's like here and he has to build this team like right from the get-go, and it's like, well, why are you doing this? Like, what's your motivation? Like, there was no motivation in him, and Ben Affleck is, I think he's actually a decent Batman. Like, I think he can pull it off. I just think it's a failure of the writing and the story.
Yeah, because he's a great actor.
He's a great actor, but I feel like he's not given anything here to work with. And I feel like his character kind of just falls into the background. Yeah, he is redeemed in the big battle fight. There was a big sequence involving Batman that was cut in the first movie, and we do get to see that in this movie, and it's actually pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I want to go off two things that you said that we hadn't mentioned yet. The action scenes are monumentally improved in this movie. The action scenes in Whedon's film make no sense at all. I'm not even gonna go into it. But this movie's action scenes are actually like bordering on pretty good, or they're at least exciting. The last one is pretty exciting, and I think I like how all of the heroes kind of helped each other. All of their powers were kind of bouncing off one another. That the action sequence really made sense. So Amy Adams is in this, Jeremy Irons is in this, and Ben Affleck is in this. Jeremy Irons is actually, I think, pretty good. But Amy Adams and Ben Affleck really aren't given much to do. Like, they're great actors, and they can really like dig their teeth into the right material. I feel like Amy Adams is almost like a comic strip that's trying to teach children about tragedy or something. Like, she's just kind of like laying in bed like, oh. I wish she had a bit more of, I don't know, just some sort of depth.
And on top of that, like, that's one of the differences I noticed between these two movies, is that the actual performances seemed better in the second movie, which was so interesting because I thought the performances in the first movie were actually kind of bad.
Yeah.
And somehow I don't know if it was the editing or how the music played or just the way it was cut, the performance or whether they used different takes or whatnot, but like the performances were actually better. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, which makes you wonder why they used the takes that they did in the prior film. Some of it has to do with, in the context of the scenes, the lines make more sense and they feel less just kind of like oomph, like just thrown on you. What it doesn't fix, though, is how kind of wooden and emotionless the dialogue is.
Yeah, and in terms of the first movie, like, Whedon did this really stupid thing. I don't know if it was him or the editor, whoever did this, but like scenes, and this would happen like every ending of a major scene, that somebody would say, like, proclaim something. It's like, we need to stop him. And then somebody would be like, we will. And then it would just cut to the next scene. But every single time there was a scene like that, it would just end the same way.
There was like 8 in a row in the beginning of the movie.
Oh my God, they were so frustrating.
We haven't burned this light for 8,000 years. Nobody will know what it means. She will.
And then it cuts. And they redid that. Obviously, that was totally different in the second movie. Yeah. And it worked so much better because they didn't focus on these stupid cliche scene endings.
It's actually fascinating. If you were in film school and you were taking an editing class, how to take the exact same material and just, we actually did that in my film class in high school. We cut up a heist and it was like radically different every time. But this is kind of a cool editing exercise. That was a lot of fun for me personally, just to see how different this film was.
I completely agree. I think that was one of the most enjoyable things I found watching this movie, was just kind of being able to pick these comparisons and how a movie could be mostly shot by the same person and, you know, controlled by a director in 2 different scenarios, and how you could end up with 2 different products. I think that's just a testament to, when you're creating a movie, like, Zack Snyder obviously had a vision, and that vision is unique to him as a director, and nobody else can replicate what he does. And we see that in his own version. So I mean, and you know, particularly props to the fans on really pushing this through. Because I think it's definitely something that deserved to be seen. All right, so what do you give this as a grade?
So I would give this a C. I think the first one's like a D-. So this is an improvement. I mean, I would say that there are a lot of parts of this movie that are decent. I think the action scenes are pretty good. A lot of it's watchable. To be honest, the 4 hours actually went by pretty fast. I wasn't staring at, you know, my phone the whole time or looking at my watch. but I just think there's all these Snyder-esque problems here that will just never leave him.
You know what? Yeah, even considering those problems, there's a lot of stylistic things here that I really do like about Zack Snyder, and some of them were done very well in this movie, especially in the climax and the big battle scene. I think I'm gonna go with a B- here. And you know, I was teetering. My score after the end of the movie, like the end of the climax, right before the epilogue, I was sitting, it ended up bringing my score up to a B, because I was like, oh, this is getting really good. And then the epilogue hit, and I was just like, no.
Same. I went from a C+ to a C.
Now let's go to spoilers.
Okay. So this epilogue is bullshit. What is this? Like, this is just an excuse to get Jared Leto as Joker in the movie. I can't see any other reason for this thing existing.
The epilogue was actually okay to me halfway through until it got to the dream sequence with Batman.
I'm sorry, I'm only talking about the dream sequence. Yes, the stuff with everybody returning to their lives, that stuff is fine.
That was totally fine for me, and there were little building blocks in there too for future movies, and so that all worked really well to me. Yeah, when it gets to that dream sequence, you're first like, what the is happening for like a good, like, because the problem is that dream sequence is way too long. It doesn't break out of the dream for like 10 minutes. So you're sitting there like, is this really real? And then he wakes up and you're like, oh, this thing again. And then it's just like, what's the point of having Jared Leto come back if it's just a dream sequence?
Yeah, and then Ben Affleck wakes up from his dream. He looks like hungover as hell, and he like, ugh, and he like walks over to his door, and the Martian hunter is there, who was in the movie like briefly before for 2 seconds, and he's like, I want to help you guys. And he's like, well, we could really use some help. See you later. And then he like goes back to bed. Like, what was that? I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. Like,
was so
like
bad.
How is that ending better than the ending where Superman is like taking his clothes off to be Superman? That's such a great ending.
Yeah.
And then it just feels so tacked on and unnecessary. Like fan service in the worst way.
I rate that part of the movie an F.
Yes.
And you know what? It makes it so bad is that...
Did you see my jaw like was on the floor? Were you looking at me at all?
Yeah, you were like, what the hell is happening? You had this look about you. And then I think it's just that none of it also... The problem was you can't just throw those things in a movie. Yeah. What you have to do is you have to allude to them first. You have to show us that you can't just show... Like, he shows up in the movie for like a good like minute, playing Martha. Like, he redisguises himself as Martha to help Lois Lane like get over her grief, and then but it's like that isn't alluding to a character enough. Like, you need other characters mentioning him, and you know, these things have to be built and they have to be crafted and taken care of like a little baby, and they just took this character and just threw him in here just for kicks, and it was so stupid.
And there's this thing that maybe Batman's having a vision, right? Because in the like halfway through the movie, he's like, I just had a vision that Flash told me. That's the only setup for these visions or dreams or whatever he's having. And we need the Martian hunter to come fight DC Thanos or whatever his name is. I just can't. I can't with the epilogue of this movie. It's funny too, because the rest of it, none of it is hilariously bad. You're just like, okay, this is too long or whatever. But like the end is pretty hilariously bad.
Yeah, that was just terrible. I don't even know. They reshot that too, right? They actually
did.
shot that.
Yeah, they brought Jared Leto in to shoot it, yeah.
Oh my god.
I don't understand.
All right, and that's it for our review of Zack Snyder's Justice League. Let us know what you think in the comments about this new recut of the movie, and we'll see you in the next video.